Hey friends, welcome to the 90.7 pod. I am your host, Isyss Garcia, and this is the Jazz Corner, where we talk about all things jazz for the music lovers and creators. So for all the haters, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Okay, now let's get into the music. Alright people, we've got a lot to get into today, so let's just get into it. Today, we're going to be exploring the origins of jazz and its impact on the next gen in a little series which I like to call Jazz in the Next Gen. The reason why we're making this series today is because the presence of jazz in popular music has never been more prevalent, yet many people don't know where it came from or by who. A lot of people get it misconstrued because for as long as jazz has existed, it's been exploited. But we're not going to get into that today because I only have about 30 minutes of airtime, okay? Alright, before we get into the nitty gritty, I want to give y'all the song of the day where I highlight my favorite jazz influenced song, and you have no choice but to listen to it. Let me know your thoughts on the song in the comments below, and if you want to tell me your song of the day, let us know in the comments, and you can force the entire triangle area to listen to your song. Now, without further ado, the song of the day is Flow Strings by Flow Bop, Low Greco Bros, and Soul Stance. It's what you're listening to right now. Flow Strings was released in 2024 and is able to recapture and expand on the essence of jazz into a sound that is both modern, yet something from a past lifetime. No words, just thoughts. Now, as the name of the podcast implies, let's get into the jazz. Now, for those who may not know, jazz was created right around the turn of the 20th century. Or could you argue that it was discovered? Was jazz created or was it discovered? Y'all let me know in the comments below. But what really is jazz? Well, the best way I can describe jazz is a combination of syncopated rhythms, polyphonic ensembles, deliberate deviations in pitch, and improvisation. It was developed partially from blues and ragtime, and yet, even with this definition that I just gave you, there is really no precise and all-encompassing definition of jazz. And jazz is not just something that you listen to. Jazz is a way of being, okay? Jazz is a way of life. We are all jazz, and jazz is everything. Okay, sorry, I might be getting a little bit carried away. Now that we have an idea of what jazz is, let's take a brief look at the extensive history of jazz and how it came to be what it is today. Alright, let's take it all the way back to the 1920s, shall we? Let's go to the heart of New Orleans, specifically within the African American community. This is the epicenter and the roots of what we know today as jazz. And from this point on, the musical style would transcend into a diverse and never-ending subset of genres. And these genres and these subgenres would be appreciated by people all over the world, not just the African American community. In the 20s, jazz was almost purely improvisation, where each player would do background rhythms while each individual player would go up and do a solo. This was known primarily as New Orleans jazz, but as the genre began to progress, many artists such as Duke Ellington and Count Basie would begin relying less on improvisation and started performing the music how it was written. This would cause the genre to start appealing to more people, which ultimately caused it to travel all the way up to northern territories such as New York and Chicago, and from there, it would only continue to grow. Now that we got that origin story out of the way, we will continue to talk about the history of jazz and the different subgenres right after this next segment, which I like to call Guess That Sample. So stay tuned, you're not going to want to miss this. Welcome to Guess That Sample, where we take some of our favorite songs from the 21st century and have you all guess which artist/song the sample derives from. Let us know your answers in the comments, and bonus points if you can guess when the original song was released. Today's sampled song is Corte Madera, California by Larry June. It was released in 2022, and I'm playing the intro right now.
Hopping out swinging, you know what I mean? Crazy. Man. Ay. Taking pictures on the jet, Escalade at my arrival. Gotta stay on your toes, work on your posture.
As y'all can hear, it's definitely some light keys in there, as well as a horn. So obviously there's that jazz influence in this sample. But can y'all guess what the original song is and who made the original? Was it A, Count Basie and Duke Ellington, B, Miles Davis and John Coltrane, C, Duke Ellington and John Coltrane, or D, Louis Armstrong and Miles Davis? And you know what, guys? I'm feeling a little generous today, so I'm gonna go ahead and give y'all a few hints for those who are still stumped. So hint number 1 is the original artists will be mentioned in today's podcast. I may have already mentioned them, or I might mention them in our next segment where I continue the rest of jazz history. Either way, you're gonna have to pay attention and keep listening to figure it out. Or you may have to rewind this podcast to see if you missed anything. And hint number 2 is they are known as some of the founding fathers of jazz. Stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out who the sampled artist is, and if you want to pick the next song for Guess That Sample, you can put it in the comments below or let us know on our Instagram at WNCU_FM. Now, let's get back into the swing of things. Alright people, we are back talking about the history of jazz, and I'm going to get more into the different genres of jazz, if you will. So, as I mentioned earlier, jazz isn't just one concrete thing. Instead, it's a culmination of many different things, influenced and derived from countless other things, to come together to form what we know as jazz. So, with that being said, there have been multiple different versions or subgenres of jazz that had begun to develop, and each one holds its own unique origin story. So I'm just gonna go through the timeline of jazz in the 20th century, and we're gonna see how these different subgenres came to be. So, picking up off the nationwide spread of jazz in the 1920s that we previously covered, the 30s and 40s were basically an extension of that nationwide spread. A lot of events during this time period, such as the Great Depression, were thought to have an impact on the sonic landscape of music at the time, and jazz was certainly no exception to this impact. Historical events like the end of the Great Depression and this wartime era that they were stepping into had inspired artists to experiment with new musical styles, thus giving way to a plethora of different subgenres. The most notable at the time, though, was swing and experimental jazz. Swing is described as a musical style that derived from its emphasis on the offbeat, something that was not the norm at the time. This gave it a very distinct sound with an infectious groove that captivated listeners all over the country, which ultimately contributed to the mainstream appeal of jazz altogether. And experimental jazz is pretty self-explanatory, just experimenting with different sounds that aren't necessarily typically used in a jazz genre, and this just kind of helped it even more to grow the sound and grow the appeal of it, because it wasn't just the same specific sounds that it had been known to use. So the 50s and 60s expanded upon this experimentation with new styles such as cool jazz, free jazz, modal jazz, and hard bop, all making their way to the mainstream due to artists such as Miles Davis popularizing the sound. These styles typically blended already existing styles such as gospel and soul with jazz to develop a unique sound. This is the beginning of what we like to call fusion. So, if you guys aren't realizing the pattern yet, it is a pattern of jazz being derivative of something else, you know? But this is why I really love jazz, because you can really hear the influences and the different styles that it has adopted over the years to become what it has become. Because if I were to play jazz music from the 1920s, we can go ahead and play a little bit of that. It sounds drastically different than what jazz sounded like in the 70s, in the 80s, and the 90s. So let's continue. The 70s was known as the era of fusion, and this is where things get a little funky, okay? Both literally and figuratively. At this point in time, jazz is more mainstream than ever, with other demographics consuming and recreating the musical style, if you catch what I drift. We are not in the African American community no more. Jazz has since broken out of that bubble, so it was countless other cultural and ethnic groups that were adopting this musical style, which there's nothing wrong with because it just added on to the uniqueness and the different subgenres that came out of that time. So, these jazz combinations included rock, R&B, and funk, and they were very prevalent during this time, in addition to the use of electric and electronic instruments becoming the new normal and modernizing the sound. That's why when we listen to a lot of jazz in the 70s, it sounds very, I guess, vibrant, if you will. It sounds almost futuristic because they had all these new different sounds to play with. So it's a very, very interesting time for jazz. It's one of my favorite periods in jazz personally because I love that sort of funky, futuristic sound, yet it sounds like something that was made decades and decades ago, because it is. Another popular genre that came out of this period was psychedelic jazz. So if y'all haven't listened to psychedelic jazz, I recommend y'all go listen to it. I might play some for y'all next week, but y'all will just have to tune in and see. Anyways, let's get back to it. Yet, with all the change going underway in the genre, one thing that remained consistent was the focus of improvisation. This is the foundation of what gave jazz its defining characteristics in the early 20th century, and what would continue to define the genre all the way to the 80s and 90s, okay? Word of the day, people, improvisation, okay? The best things come from improvisation, okay? This part that I'm saying to you guys right now is improvisation, okay? I think it just opens the door for more creativity and more possibilities because you're not necessarily thinking about the next move that you're gonna do, you just do it. And I think that's what jazz is all about. Jazz is all about improvisation and confidence and doing something that isn't necessarily in the norm, but that's just how you feel in that moment, so you do as you feel. And that's why I love jazz so much. Anyways, the 80s and 90s were no different than the previous years in the sense that they continued to build and compound on the sound and innovations that had been popularized years prior. So think of this time as another extension of the 70s, but with more fusion, more technology, and more international artists adopting the jazz sound. This brought forth even more subgenres such as acid jazz and one of the more significant evolutions of the genre, which is jazz rap, which comes in the early 90s. Acid jazz was created in London clubs and combines elements of funk, soul, hip-hop, and even disco to create a rare groove that is so captivating it would spread to the US and other Western territories. And it's a testament to how the genre became so widely popular to the point that it was now being reinvented by foreign artists, which had their own unique impact on American culture. Jazz rap, as I mentioned, is known as a fusion between jazz and hip-hop and is considered its own alternative subgenre in hip-hop today. It's actually one of my personal favorite genres, if I do say so myself. Its impact is so significant that it defined the sound of the early 90s and continues to define the sound of the mid-2020s and is arguably growing in popularity day by day, depending on who you ask. If you ask me, I would say yes. this leads me to my next topic, which we will be covering in the next episode of the Jazz Corner, which I like to call Jazz in the Next Gen, where we like to take a look at who and what is pioneering the genre of jazz as we know it today. Who are the rising stars in the genre, and what sounds are shaping the landscape of jazz as we know it today? Stay tuned for that, but first, we are going to do our Guess That Sample Artist Reveal. All right, everybody, welcome back to Guess That Sample. I hope everybody put their answers of who they think the original sample is in the comments below, because we're going to go ahead and reveal those right now. So, the song that was sampled in Corte Madera, California by Larry June is, drumroll please, In a Sentimental Mood by Duke Ellington and John Coltrane, released in 1963. If you got it right, let me know in the comments below. If you got it wrong, also let me know in the comments below, because at the end of the day, it's nothing to be embarrassed about, all right? We all here because we love jazz, so, this is a learning experience for everybody, so don't be ashamed. Hopefully next week you'll be able to get the answer right when we do the next Guess That Sample. And if you want to give yourself a little bit of an edge, you can go ahead and let us know what you want for the next Guess That Sample. You can go ahead and comment on our Instagram at WNCU_FM, or just let us know in the comments of this video. All right, so the reason why I chose this song today is because it would be wrong to have a podcast about jazz and not talk about Duke Ellington and John Coltrane. Like, come on. These two have both cemented their legacies as some of the founding fathers of jazz, which leads me to my next segment where I would like to shed some light on notable jazz artists that were trailblazers in their own capacity within the jazz space. This is the Jazz Corner's Shining Stars. Alright, so for today's segment on Shining Stars, we will be focusing primarily on Duke Ellington to save time, but for all of my viewers aboard the Coltrane, make sure you guys stay tuned for next week's episode, because we will be diving into the good, the bad, and the ugly surrounding John Coltrane and his impact on jazz. But today our focus is on Duke. So, Mr. Duke Ellington was born Edward Kennedy Ellington in Washington, D.C. in 1899. He is a famous pianist and is considered to be one of the greatest jazz composers of his time. He is also one of the originators of big band jazz and led his band for over half a century. And for those who may not know, big band jazz, or jazz orchestra if you will, is a type of musical ensemble of jazz music, and it usually consists of 10 or more musicians, which is quite a lot for jazz, but it includes 10 or more musicians with 4 sections consisting of typically saxophone, trumpet, trombone, and some sort of rhythmic element. This was originated around the 1910s, on the cusp of the 1920s, but skyrocketed to popularity and dominated the jazz scene in the 1940s, around the time when swing was at its most popular, I would say. So big band jazz, in addition to swing jazz, and a combination of both, that was very, very popular during this time. So I think everybody should thank Duke Ellington for popularizing big band jazz, because it really does add a certain level of essence to it, and it's a lot going on with big band jazz because it's multiple different sections going on at the same time, but when we put it all together, it just creates a masterpiece. So that's why I just really wanted to highlight it right here. During this era where big band jazz was just huge, it was popular, it was everywhere. During this time, Duke Ellington had composed thousands of scores, and over the course of his career, he had created one of the most distinctive ensemble sounds in the history of Western music, okay? Not just the history of jazz music, people, the history of Western music completely. So this was huge. I would say some of my favorite tracks by Duke Ellington personally are In a Sentimental Mood, Take the A Train, and My Little Brown Book. I would love to hear your guys' favorite projects and tracks by Duke as well, so definitely be sure to let me know in the comments below. And just to further contextualize his influence and his greatness in the music space, let me just list off some of his accomplishments, shall we, or some of his awards. He has won a Presidential Medal of Freedom. He's in the Grammy Hall of Fame. He won a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. He also won a Grammy Award for Best Score Soundtrack, a Grammy Trustees Award, a Grammy Award for Best Performance by an Orchestra, Grammy Award for Best Instrumental Composition. If y'all couldn't tell, if I didn't make it clear enough, this man is beloved by the Recording Academy, okay? In total, he has amassed around 14 Grammy Awards, okay? That's not just a normal accomplishment, okay? Most of your favorite artists don't even have one Grammy, let alone 14, okay? So I just want y'all to get that picture of how great Duke was, okay? 14 Grammy Awards, in addition to the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Like, who is doing it like Duke, okay? And then in addition to that, he received a Pulitzer Prize, okay? A posthumous Pulitzer Prize, that is, for music in 1999. So if I didn't make it clear before, his influence and his greatness and his achievements are one of a kind, and his innovations within the jazz landscape will forever be used, and his name will forever go down as one of the best, if not the best, jazz composer of past generations, this generation, and probably for generations to come. So that is Duke Ellington for you folks, and this is the Jazz Corner's Shining Stars. Stay tuned for the next segment. All right, everybody, for this next segment, we're going to keep it short and sweet, and I just want to give you guys a little bit of my sauce, if you will. I'm usually a gatekeeper, and I like to keep all the good songs to myself, seeing that I am a DJ. But you know what? Like I said earlier, I'm feeling a little bit generous, so I'm going to go ahead and give you guys my playlist of the week, where I highlight my 10 favorite jazz songs at the moment. Each song has its own unique style. None of them sound the same, but they all kind of have a certain vibe going. I have music from, of course, our song of the day, Flow Strings, some songs from our Guess That Sample. So, you know, of course, some Duke Ellington is going to be on there, some Larry June is going to be on there. And it really explores a bunch of different subgenres of jazz. So we got some psychedelic jazz, we got some Japanese jazz, we got some old school jazz, some more modern jazz, you name it. We got something here for everybody, and I think you guys will love it. So it's 10 songs in this playlist. For the next playlists, I may end up adding some more, depending on how the reception of this podcast goes. But it's a smooth 35 minutes, so, you know, if you have a little commute to work, or maybe you're on your lunch break, you can just go ahead and listen to this playlist and just relax and just let the jazz consume you. You can access this playlist in the bio of the WNCU Instagram page, which is WNCU_FM, or you can also search it up on Spotify by simply typing in WNCU FM Jazz Playlist of the Week, and it should pop up. So yeah, just enjoy. I think you guys are gonna like it. I like it a lot. So that's really all that matters to me. But I'm sure you guys will love it as well, because who doesn't love jazz? I mean, that's why you guys are here in the first place. So I would hope that you guys go listen to the playlist. And that is it for this segment. And we're going to go ahead and transition to our last segment of the day. All right, everybody, this marks our last segment of the day. I hope y'all are all feeling good. I'm feeling amazing. Personally, we went through an entire musical journey of the origin of jazz and how the sound has evolved over the years. I hope you guys learned something today. Now we're going to talk about one of my favorite parts of this podcast, where I like to highlight my favorite events / small businesses in Durham. So let's go ahead and get into the events first. All right, for this next event, it takes place in downtown Raleigh. It is called Jazz in the Square. It is a free outdoor jazz concert series featuring some of your favorite local musicians. Yes, y'all heard that right. It is free, and it takes place August 8th, August 15th, and August 22nd. The date for August 8th will take place in Moore Square from 6 to 8 p.m. And the thing that I like about this the most is it has my two favorite components, okay? Jazz music, and it's free. So you can't go wrong with that. So I definitely recommend popping out and having a good time and just soaking up the good vibes. So definitely check that out. I will be there. And for my small business highlight of the week, I just wanted to shout out one of my personal favorite Black-owned restaurants, which is Let's Eat Soul Food. It is located at 2514 Fayetteville Street, and they are open from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. And the food is out of this world. So if you love soul food, I would definitely suggest running down there. And yes, I mean run, do not walk, because they sell out very fast and there's usually a line. But I will say it is 100% worth the wait. So definitely go get you some soul food, all right? Y'all might just run into me over there as well. And that wraps up my highlights of the week. Now we're going to go into closing statements. All right, folks, that's going to be it for today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this week's episode of the 90.7 Pods, The Jazz Corner. The pod where you don't have to like jazz to enjoy it, but that makes it all the more better. Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments below and let us know what you want to see from us at The Jazz Corner. I'm your host, Isyss Garcia, and we will catch you in the next one.